G'day folks, talk to Dr Steve Leicester, a clinical psychologist with over 25 years experience in the mental health sector. Currently working with Orygen, previously with Headspace. He's got a whole lot of knowledge and innovative ways of how he's been able to develop and deliver programs physically, out in the community, or digitally, taking advantage of the technology that we've got today. Mental health is so important. A lot of the organisations that he's worked for, there's a lot that people can take advantage of to help, because there's a lot of stigma behind it when it's got to do with mental health. And if you've got all the intersectionality behind it as well, if you've got drug use, disability, intergenerational trauma, PTSD, there's a whole massive range, homelessness. There's a lot of people struggling, and Dr. Steve Leicester is doing solid work. Full disclaimer, the audio from my end throughout the podcast, there was an effect put on, megaphone effect, but we fixed it, salvageable. It's all good. Still a solid, young, good podcast, but just had to put it out there just in case you're like, oh, Jake doesn't sound like his usual self, but it's still all good. Keep the wheels turning. So if you like the podcast, hit that subscribe or follow button. And we've also got a Patreon page. The link is within the description. So if you want to roll with the squad and become a patron, that'd be great. I want to thank our sponsors, Permobil Australia, the greatest electric wheelchairs in the land. Wouldn't be sitting in anything else but these four wheels right here. And they've got great assistive tech also. So righto, let's get into it. So, Dr. Steve Leicester, and did I pronounce that right?
Oh, not quite. Leicester. If you ever played Monopoly, it's like Leicester Square. But you can call me what you want.
Dr. Steve Leicester. So Steve's all good?
Yeah, no worries.
Just want to double, triple confirm. So really appreciate you jumping on the podcast and getting ready to have a yarn with me about all the important work that you've done in and around psychology.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We'll see how we go.
See how we go. Righto. So just growing up, just what pulled you towards the world of psychology, and if there was any inspiration behind that, if it was local, if it was international authors, other clinical psychology in general?
I probably took a bit of a weird path. Well, I'm in my mid-50s now. And through high school, it was certainly not something that was taught. Mental health wasn't spoken about, but I was fascinated by the concept of, I guess, talking therapies and this idea of connection and social connection. But I took a really roundabout path, and I took a mechanics apprenticeship and left school after Form 4. And I think I was a couple months in, and I was, man, this is not paying. and I really liked it. Went back to school, finished off. That was a long time ago, obviously. Trained as a teacher, but had the minor issue of I quite like teaching. I just didn't like schools, so that kind of limited the job front. And I'd kept psychology as part of the, I guess, still this hope of imagine being in this world where you're actually having this really close connection with people, and it become part of your vocational work. So I kept it up through university, and then stuffed around and did a lot of things, and went back and finished my postgraduate. But it was still this idea of imagine being in this space where connection, meaningful connection, quite deep connection with people is what you do, and you craft it obviously in an evidence-based way, but still using that as the basis of your work and supporting others. I was fascinated by it, and was been very lucky to kind of land on my feet in that space. So there wasn't a, there was actually, Jake, there was someone that inspired me, and it was a Form 5, I don't know what they call, careers counsellor. And she said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "I want to be a psychologist." And I was not doing great at school at that time. And she said, I remember her
So
saying,
this
"That's
is before
unlikely."
mechanics, yeah?
I went after the mechanics, went back and into what was Form 5 then. And I remember her telling me, "That's going to be very unlikely for you, Stephen." And I still remember that to this day. So, you know, sometimes that, as well as positive motivation, a little bit of agitation can sometimes have a bit of a spurring drive in us. But still, social connection is the big thing. Connection is absolutely it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really important, connection, like in all form factors. Talking about mechanics, are you still getting connected to cars or what?
Motorbikes.
Right.
That's my thing, for better or worse. And I'm not a great mechanic. I'm probably not a great rider, but have been doing it for a very long time. And like with most people and motorbikes, I ride something that is way more powerful than I ever need, and probably beyond my skills to take it to any limits. But fortunately, I was riding well before I had kids, so I was able to keep it going. But yeah, that's kind of the thing. I'd love to be I'd love to have a garage where I could work on something and spend shitloads of money not knowing what I'm doing.
Yeah, I'm hearing that. No, before I ended up in a wheelchair, I used to ride road bikes and whatnot, and got a love for that there too. So it's nothing like being, it's so different compared to being behind the wheel of a car. So, but
Yeah,
yeah,
it's a strange one,
it is.
but once again, very lucky to be able to have that.
It is.
And I could bang on about
Yeah,
that and well-being in another
could be a whole
time, anytime.
separate podcast, eh? So,
Yeah.
so within, because like a lot of occupations, right, there's different facets within that, like which realm that you can go
Yeah.
go down. So once you were in psychology, so what path drew you in? Because I can see your background on what you've done, but like when you got a specific niche within psychology itself.
It's a great question, and look, I've had a lucky, good career, I think. I've been, and I don't use that term luck lightly. I suppose more, I've been open to what's available. I probably haven't planned it as well as many, but being a little bit opportunistic. So youth mental health was the big one, and I started in that space in the 90s, the late 90s, and in Melbourne. And at that time, there was a real, it's almost like a movement of rethinking approaches to youth mental health, and terms such as early intervention and so forth really came into the picture
What, just
a lot
manipulating
more.
like neuroplasticity and stuff like that, being younger?
Oh, I think there was a couple of things. And the area I started working in was young people experiencing psychosis and first episode psychosis. And I guess historically, and it still continues, the idea that a lot of treatment was provided when people were very ill, especially with adults. And I guess the ethos was to, what about engaging people early when things are commencing to get a lot more difficult, and providing biopsychosocial support, not just medication, but engaging with others, psychological support. And if we can work with people early, the support can be less intrusive, so lower levels of hospitalisation, medicine, and so forth. and the idea and hope that recovery happens quicker, and it's an exciting sort of environment to work in. So as far as a specialty, it was a very broad area. It's this thing of youth mental health, which, you know, was at that time 15 to 25-year-olds. And I worked in that space in public health for around 13 years and was lucky enough to link like a PhD whilst I was still doing clinical work and so forth. So that was great. And I had at one point ideas of heading down a research path, but that's probably not for me for two reasons. One is I just don't think I'm smart enough to be able to do research. There's some really smart people out there that just, I feel like an utter doormat when I'm around them sometimes. And the other thing is that
Hey, come on now, don't be so modest.
No, seriously, this it's like and maybe I'm a bit gullible and I just nod my head and pretend I know what they're talking about. But the other part of it, to take a research career is really stressful because a big part of the career is just finding money to keep doing their work.
And
So
individuals too, to do the work with and on and around, like the people that need help.
Totally. It's absolutely. So I've enjoyed working in public health. As a psychologist, a clinical psychologist, I've never done private practice. I kind of think that's where a lot do. I think, oh my God, that's a small business. And I like being around people and like in the public health settings. So once again, I didn't desperately plan when I'd finished my studies to go, right, I want to work in youth mental health. I was very interested in an organisation at the time, which I'd heard of, and which is now an organisation called Orygen, where I'm currently working back at after being away for 11 or 12 years. But the youth mental health space, I think, has really opened up in the past 20 or so years. And I also have done a fair bit of work within drug treatment and in that space. I probably don't really like using the term drug treatment. It's just working with people that use substances. And I kind of approach that space, which I'm working in a bit now. I totally respect people's choices to use whatever they do use, and I guess the ethos I come from is to support safety and for their quality of life, and if that means using safely, that's great. That's not for me to pass judgment on, to tell you to stop or something like that. So I've had a bit of a mixed bag in that space, but
yeah, because if people are going downhill fast, it's like, really trying to balance out what to do. But when you're talking about ethos, but I'm looking at like clinical reach. So if you're looking at going from psychologist to clinical psychologist, like what is that step up and what does it involve? Like what powers does it give you within your sector?
Look, it's an interesting one. To be honest, I think I've got to be cautious what I say here, but I work with occupational therapists, mental health nurses, social workers, peer workers, and the commonality and similarities in so much of what we do far outweighs the differences. So I think of myself as a psychologist. I did some further training and so forth, or a branch of training that allows me to, in clinical psychology, we can't really technically call ourselves clinical psychologists. We're endorsed by a college. But I think a fair bit of our focus may be more toward mental illness and the areas of working with people experiencing mental illnesses. But if I say that, I also realise that so many people across the mental health sector work within people with mild to moderate to severe mental illnesses. I guess what I'm saying, Jake, is I think we're in a new time and era where we can and should be less worried about the qualification tags, whether it be clinical psychologists, whatever division nurses, mental health social workers, mental health OTs, and so forth. And if we're working on the same page together, I think the crossover of what we do is remarkably similar.
God, that is so important, like just putting it that way, because it's like any occupation, right? Where I've worked in like a lot of disability, but I've worked in other sectors, but as well and crossed over. And you got individuals that are either good at their jobs or not, regardless of title. But as long as people come together, and they can form, an appropriate circle and, forge forward as a team, that's all you got to worry
It's
about. And if you see an effective change.
I think it's so true. I'd love to hear your take on it, but I sometimes think, and mate, I'm not right across the disability sector, but I wonder, are there times where you've got sort of different professions going, oh, I'll do that bit, you do that bit, you do this bit, and you over there do that bit, and you lose sight of the whole person.
Yeah,
And
you're spot on. I've seen it like with different clinical professionals where, look, I've been in the game for a long time, right? And I've been involved with many different types, if it's OTs, clinical psychs, neuroscientists, like all types of different professionals. And, everybody's got their strengths and weaknesses. But where I've seen where, majority of the time it's where things have worked out, where it's excelled for the client and pushed them further and, making sure that they're safe and get their needs done, like whether it's underneath the NDIS, because I work on not just the National Disability Insurance Scheme, I'm in other disability schemes as well, but where things, whether it's been assessments or reports come across to me and I'm like, the NDIS are just going to have one look at this and just throw it out the door, and which has happened. So,
right,
but sometimes, individuals can't help it because they might have crossed over from, from say New South Wales, Queensland, or Victorian Health, and they've come into undernet working in this banner, the NDIS, and it's a
mm.
total different ballgame because where, say, if it's got to do with OTs or psychs or different clinical professionals, and you use different tool sets, and some people
Yeah,
just assume that they know, and sometimes when you see certain bias sort of roll into the equation, and because you've got to keep intersectionality in mind and cultural indifferences, and like there's so much to it.
mm.
So, and because myself, I consult to the NDIA, so yes, I'm a proud advocate, and and I work in service provision because I want to give people tangible outcomes, but ultimately I want the scheme to work better because
Yeah,
there's a lot that's right, there's a lot that's wrong, there's a lot where it's in between, but it's what I always say, high tide raises all canoes, right? There's so many individuals out there, whether it's people with disability or the clinical professionals, so if we're all in there and rowing at the same speed and together in a formation, not just having one captain up the top of the ship and steering it, it's having a
yeah.
collective of everyone at the forefront and having our voices being heard, but making sure that they're not just so echo chambers. It is effective change, and
It
yeah,
I think it's a couple of things that you is resonating for me as you're talking there is that I think the thing of the days of the social worker only does this, the only OT only does this, the psychologist only does this, and I'm hoping we're getting a lot better of actually doing a lot of seeing the whole person in front of us and not compartmentalizing. And there's some examples in systems you've probably seen as the idea of parallel care. Like you'll go to your drug and alcohol support on the Tuesday, you'll have your mental health for severe mood disorder on the Wednesday, you'll have whatever for a your gambling issue on a Thursday and so forth. And I have seen that where it compartmentalizes people into these things and not seeing the whole person. And in the example, we'll say substance use and mental health, I've never thought of it really as two separate things, as this is what is presenting for this person. And you can, look, right, there's physical components with substance use, especially when it's getting into really problematic levels. There's mental health implications, there's functional implications, there's relational implications. These are all part of that whole person. And I know I'm jumping around a little bit, but one of the big things you mentioned there was like with the NDIS and so forth is a lot of our work, in fact, probably the more stressful and taxing stuff is the systems we work in that are, man, I am shitful trying to navigate the NDIS and just I feel like and the long. Yeah, it is a language, and certain ways. It was really interesting what you said. Is there, you might see a report and it has the best of intentions, but you'll be able to go, mate, I'll tell you, we need some panel beating in order to get that one over the line.
Yeah, and the thing is, I've had people get pretty disgruntled because they're like, because I'm this profession, you shouldn't tell me X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, hey, I've had the experience of seeing a lot of these documents go through and get knocked back. Like, it's just trying to make this stuff a bit more robust. Don't be married to your ideas, right? Just look outside of it. It's helping the individual. Like, let's all work together. Like, I'm not just saying this for no reason. So
I guess, it's, I hope our podcast can be mutual rather than you just asking me questions.
No, that's it. That's it. This is going back and forth. I've got stuff that I want to throw at you. Not too many curveballs or anything, but it's
no.
And that's it. It's just that's what this is about. Just organic chat, and it can just go over which way.
Fantastic, because I'm fascinated. Like, even from your lens and your perspective, we've got a lot of national discussion and potentially debate regarding the NDIS. There's it's been a seismic shift in the past 10, 15 years. And it's where that lands for you, what even some of your thoughts, hopes or fears as well, because I'm in a public mental health service, and certainly NDIS is certainly on the cards, is on our focus, is part of some of the assessments work and we're doing and so forth, and it's bringing up opportunities, challenges, and probably uncertainties as well. And I'm wondering what's your. I know there's been a lot more discussion nationally and so forth. Even some of the credentialing of providers, is that going to hugely limit what's available versus? And I know there's no black and white in this sort of stuff, but
yeah, there isn't, and that's a loaded question. That one, there's a lot going on. So because the NDIS is so large nationally, and there's so much to it, there's so much involved and so many tiers to it, like whether and what's been going on recently, because they've, chopped some dollars and cents out of it. And I mean, like, millions. And because, where Shorten's talking about, a lot of the crooks and that's going on, and where they might be changing to. And personally, I think it's a good idea if, like, a lot of the organisations are registered, because I went through the whole registration process and I'm governed under the NDIS Quality and Safeguards Commission, and we're fully accountable, and because we've got to make sure that we're doing the right thing when we're looking after vulnerable individuals in the community, right? But when you got plan managed, you can have someone off the street, just get an ABN and walk through the door of someone. And I've seen this, but look, you've got a lot of unsavoury characters that are registered providers. Because, like, in the same town that I'm working out of, this company was recently on a current affair. Like, I was wheeling back from, because I was getting some metal fabrication done for in the office, and I'm wheeling back from the place, and I see this camera, like, pretty because I love camera gear and all that sort of stuff. And I had a feeling what was going on because I already knew of what was happening with this organisation. And I wheeled up into the bay and saw the camera there, and I had a feeling where they were from. And I'm like, oh, where are you lot from? And they're like, oh, current affair. And I knew where they were going because,
Yeah.
like, you had these got this organisation that was, just say you've got a person's plan there, it might be 500K, and you've got to forecast that over a year and just balance that. So, and then you get these people that will go in and just extract like all of that like, within 3 months or under.
Oh,
And this is happening over and over again. So you can't just think that registered providers are the pinnacle. Yes, they are. Like when you're looking at tip of the spear, yeah. But like everyone, there's unsavoury characters in all camps. But the dangerous thing is with when you don't have registered providers where they can have like where either people can get ripped off and they can just I've worked in the construction industry also, and I've worked in tier one, and you can see it in the disability sector, and where people will just drop an ABN and pop up somewhere else, and under a new name, and they're just delivering the same shady support. So, and because I've seen instances where this person has gone into an individual's house, and that kid's 12, needs to be peg fed. They don't know what they're doing. Really, their parents not exactly sure, but they've just got this person in to help them, and they're just jamming medication and food in this, and where this kid can either end up, one, in hospital, or two, end up worse than that, and that's just one of many horror stories. Like, for my organisation to even step through the front door, and because we've got registered nurses working for our org, and we have to at least have an RN even before we step through the door to, for that person to access services with us. So, and that's, you've got the digitalisation of it now, which is, you got where you got sort of where it's your Uber care models, and I've got to be careful what I say there.
Yeah.
And
No, I hear you.
and I've seen a lot of, and I'm like, how do these people even get into the system? So, but you've got good, bad, and ugly to all different systems, but it's a mammoth task. Like when you've had all the different states and territories have their own schemes, and then it's all been consolidated into one unit, and when you got billions of dollars, like, and it's still trying to work itself out. Like, you've got a system that looks like it can work. Like, you've got to know it's got to change and you've got to see different versions of it, and that's going to be continuous. And you're still going to have shady characters along the lines. And I've seen like when it's even got to do with some of your clinical professionals, I've seen some shady stuff done there too. And I'm just
absolutely,
and public, and guardianships and back end deals, like some, just crazy stuff. But and I just stay in my own lane, get stuff done, and at the end of the day, look after these vulnerable individuals. And I'll just talk about what's right, what's wrong, what can be done better. And that's what I try and talk to the NDIA about, whether I'm talking, because I'm going down there next month, and talk, where I talk to different groups that talk to the actual board of the NDIA, and if what we say, like, no matter how little or large, because I get involved in First Nation stuff in children and young people and youth, and where we, as a collective, like, because I'm a part of a national group, and where we try and add weight to what we see and hear and within the community and throughout the nation. And if Mr. Kurt Fernley and crew take on board what we think is positive, that will make effective change and roll out through the nation. So it's it's been awesome, like, getting involved in this and seeing what.
How long have you been doing it now?
Well, and that's funny you say that. So I've been a quadriplegic now for going on 15 years. So pretty much I got involved in advocacy pretty much as soon as, and got like formally involved in advocacy back in 2010, like you'd say
Mm.
2010. But I've been informally involved in it before then because my he's on the spectrum. So,
Right.
and growing up, there was a lot going on, and like at school and at home, and him being bullied,
Mm.
and seeing his neurodiversity, and just seeing how that affected him and how it affected our family unit, and what I had to say about it
Yeah.
as a
Yeah.
young bloke. And yeah, and still, and seeing him and how he's dealing with it as an adult to this day in his mid-30s. And
Yeah.
so it's not like I just had an accident and Jake, and now disability. I've always known it.
It'd been round. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and the intersectionality of, because like I'm fair skinned, like Aboriginal, but my mother's dark, like my dad's Anglo Australian, and seeing the intersectionality of that as well, and dealing with that, and then bang, ended up with a spinal cord injury, being in the chair, being thrown into advocacy, and
Yeah.
and then getting involved in it full time nationally, and not nationally, internationally. I've gone to Geneva, like to the UN, and
Wow.
done all sorts of
Yeah. Yeah.
stuff, and and been involved in some resolutions over there. So, and then trying to bring and looking at stuff that works internationally and trying to bring that what I know and being involved with others.
That's big. When
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Being involved in advocacy, love it, but then got into like where I co-founded an organisation, Culture Connects, and giving people tangible outcomes, and we're registered in all
Yeah.
states and territories based on the Central Coast, but trying to grow that as much as we can, but still being involved in advocacy because I've started a foundation as well, and where that was tricky to get that up and running, and where so it's had advocacy
Oh,
service
I've
provision.
started a foundation
Yeah,
as well, by the way. Yeah.
yeah. So it's been a bit of a roller coaster ride, and it's and also running a business and
Yeah.
doing it with my wife and best friend and partner, and and that's the ripple effect, and that's what I push on people big time. Like, don't forget about this stuff. Like, and where I talk to the
Mm.
agency or where that person's got an acquired disability or they've been born with it, it's when I'm talking to the NDIS or hospitals, or it's like look at the family unit too. Take that into account,
Yeah.
the ripple effect. Because that rings true of how that affects a person with a disability, but their partners, their family,
It's
their community.
it's a really interesting thing you say there, because I think, look, I reckon one of there's many problems with sort of the training and probably the practice of psychologists across Australia, and I think one of the big ones is we can be too individual focused rather than the system. For instance, in psychology training in Australia, there's very few regarding in group-based therapies. It's all very individual therapy, and I think it can be too insular. And certainly, there's plenty of psychologists I know, and that they like keeping them to themselves. Maybe they've chosen the career because they like the idea of hustling off to an office and no one knowing what they're doing or something like that. Yeah. And I think we got to think much broader than just one-to-one stuff in this, and I guess the longer I am in this line of work, there was something that I had read a fair bit and thought a lot about, in the area, say in mental health and mental health, whether we want to use the term recovery or mental well-being and so forth. There's two main things that matter the most. We can do the fanciest psychological treatments we like and so forth. And those things which I firmly believe in is meaningful connection. It's a meaningful connection to people, meaningful connection with those around, so we're not in isolation, and meaningful activity, so something that engages us, that takes us beyond the now. So connection and purpose. and and we can have all the fancy phrases and workshops and conferences and so forth. I don't want to be flippant about that because it is also important for many people. But this
It is, but you need to
connection
see
and
it roll on and
purpose,
work in the community, though.
yeah, and even within like psychological treatments and so forth, if there's not that thing of if there's not the thing of connection and purpose in there, things don't shift, things don't move, things don't grow, things don't open up. It's not all just about how can we relieve anxiety and so forth, but actually having that supporting and walking with people where we can to be able to push them into that sum of connection and purpose, which is utterly terrifying when we're feeling at our utmost shittest. But it's so fundamental that across the work we should be, I think, doing, and a real commitment to that. And that thing of community and connection, I think, is one of the biggest social challenges where we're all probably thinking about of where is this going, of connection and community and belonging. So I'm not sure about you, but I think it's a freaking hard one at the moment.
It is a hard one, but you hit it spot on. Like when you're looking at all those different facets of, community culture and just walking together and holding hands, and where you can, if you can, be a bit of a Swiss Army knife and delve into, those different parts of psychology or other
Yeah.
occupations. Like that's where, like, as if it's one strong stakeholder group, you're only going to help those individuals further. With a lot of the youths that are presenting themselves, like, what are a lot of the, like with your work in your field, so what are a lot of the backgrounds that some of these youngsters are coming from? And even like if you're talking about drug use, like what's a lot of the drugs that are involved that sort of push them towards, some of the work that you've done?
It's a really interesting question. I'm going to do that cop out answer. There's no one thing, but there's a couple of things I think. So I work in a service where we're 15 to 25. We're classed as what's referred to as a tertiary mental health service. So probably we work with more younger people, maybe presenting with the severe end of mental health and wellbeing presentations. Substance use is absolutely right across the board. I think some of the common threads, there is often, but not always, a background of real challenges socioeconomically within families as well, and a lot of people doing it very hard and intergenerationally as well. Not always, but that can be there. I think one of the things it's really important to highlight that mental illness and mental ill health doesn't discriminate. It can affect people from all walks of life at times that, at all periods of life cycles as well, and absolutely affects all industries, including psychologists and mental health workers too. And I think that's a really important one. It is not to discriminate. And as I said, I've sort of been in this line of work now for 25 years. The main thing I'm learning is, are we allowed to swear on this?
Mate, you can say what you want, dog.
Is how fuck all I know. That's what I'm learning. The breadth of what I don't know is just going, my goodness.
Yeah. It's scary, isn't it?
And probably a bit liberating too,
Yeah.
because I think it really, when working with young people, clients, families, and so forth, I feel a lot more comfortable placing them in the role of the expert. And
So
that's
explain
where
that,
I'm
the role of the expert within their shoes.
Well, they will know what their mood feels like and how it affects them a lot better than I will. I want to know how much they score. I want to know how much they pay. I want to know how much the the relief, I'm actually a lot more interested in the good bits of the substance use, for instance, we use that example, than the negative bits. And you know, I'll also, I'm not sure of any form of warning, but let's say in the context of self-harm, I know it impacts a lot of people. I want to hear from them. Most people coming into health services, they know drugs aren't good. They know self-harming is linked with shame and they're going to be told not to. They know that, you know, avoidance is probably not good. People know, by and large, this stuff. Don't be the thousandth health professional to tell them that they're bad. And what if
It's
we
going to
can
just turn
come
people away.
No, I'm actually interested because there's reasons for this. They're not choosing to avoid school refuse, fire off at people or whatever it is, engage in conflict, hurt themselves. That's not a choice. They've gone, oh yeah, no, that looked really cool. I'll go down that path. It's stuff they're working, I guess, approaches they're taking to cope with what is going on and their response to really strong emotions and their world. And if we can allow that, create a space where they can start articulating of how it works for them, their space, we allow it into the room instead of telling them they're bad, and substance use is the most obvious one, we can have a really different dynamic and a really different change relationship in and really understanding some of the hardest bits is the underlying reasons for particular things, say such as substance use or withdrawal and avoidance or self-harm. Because I think
Yeah,
a
it's
lot of
like a slow
people with...
burn. Like, you know, it takes time to unravel a lot of this. Hey,
And I think very often in the mental health space, we can get so caught up, and this is a really tricky space to navigate, in this risk aversion. Of course, we don't want people to hurt themselves.
no,
Of course, we don't want people to die. But we can't be in such paralysis that everything we do is trying to keep people safe, because otherwise we just confine and constrict them.
yeah, like you got
And
acute, you know, sections of it, but
yeah,
you got to think beyond that.
yeah, and I think a lot of our mental health sector system is so focused on reducing risk. I get it, I understand that, but we have to be in a space where we work with risk and accept risk. There's no such thing as no risk. And if we can enter in that space of healthy, informed risks, and I'm probably not explaining myself that well, but once we accept that risk is there, we can start being sort of, I think, a bit more dynamic, creative, courageous in what we're doing. If we keep driving our health services to, we just got to stop risk and so forth, and do umpteen, say, risk assessments with young people that they've heard many times, we need to do things, I think, with a lot more purpose in that space. So in the example of substance use, as I said, I think one of the most common things I see so much across certainly mental health services is people, let's do everything we can to make them stop use cannabis, for instance. Weed is still, you know, weed and alcohol are the big ones, and nicotine through vaping, but weed and alcohol. And my stance on this,
Why are you
and
seeing
I'll
like a
provide...
lot of those two? Like they're like at the forefront when it comes to like a lot of the young
Yeah,
people. Yeah.
it's an interesting one within, and I've worked in adult alcohol and other drug services as well. There's a few nuances with young people that I think is important to think about with substance use. We tend to see what we call polysubstance use. So a mix of things. It less compared to adults, and certainly in the drug treatment services, you start seeing people more have chosen and connected to a particular substance or one or two substances and dependence. We see more in the under 25s and certainly under 21s of this mix, opportunistic
Yeah,
polysubstance use.
you see a
So
lot of
bits of this, bits of that.
youngsters and
Yeah.
just experimentation, and obviously that can lead to other things.
Yeah, and you might see over time that, okay, weed is the one I use the most, or a cluster of substances that might be more sedating. So that's one of the things. It can be a real mix of stuff. So there's a couple of things, say, in the idea of withdrawal. Withdrawal is it's usually less severe, say, withdrawal, but it's also a bit harder to assess and so forth. But I think one of the really big things which worries me more in the young people in substance use, they're absolutely at the lowest of the pecking order of the drug trade. So they're the ones that are going to be more likely to be exploited and abused in transactions, ripped off. Unfortunately, we see plenty with sexual exploitation in that space as well. So there are nuances with that process, but
it can get pretty murky.
Yeah, it can get pretty murky, and even the way things are traded now, it's no longer my dealer a couple of blocks away. We all know he's the community, the neighbourhood weed dealer, and so forth. It's all online. People can get so much online. It's just incredible. And so I think it's a very different stance we're kind of in that space. And I don't necessarily, I struggle with separating mental health presentation and from the substance use. They're intertwined. One can affect the other. There's a strong relationship. And I think even in the space of working with mental illness and substance use, we can't expect to just take away someone's substance use and go, yeah, it's great. There you go, you're all fixed. No, they've been using something that is giving them some kind of intrinsic reward, some comfort, some relief. We can't just take it from them and go, there you go.
Off,
Yeah, so we need to be much more, I guess, nuanced and respectful of the role of the substance use and people making quite informed decisions. I sound like I'm just kind of beating around the bush.
No, but it's pretty prominent. Yeah, like if you're looking at drug-induced psychosis, and if you're even looking at permanent disabilities like that, if it can lead to cognitive, intellectual disability, so that's pretty rife that you see that in general across the board, or it's a bit.
Yeah, there's some things I'll say which is probably some good news stories in some ways.
Yeah.
Many young people experience what we might call a psychosis, a psychotic episode, and majority recover.
Well, that's what you want to see.
There's a lot of, and the focus of recovering is in many ways that biopsychosocial, so still being reconnected back to school, connections, purpose, and so forth. There's even many people that may continue to experience symptoms, but they can develop insight around it and continue to function quite well. So living with, it's not a sentence.
Yeah.
And that's where I think one of the exciting things with working with young people in early intervention, that concept of recovery is absolutely part of the service model. It's not like, all right, this is permanent and that is it.
No, that's good.
And that's
yeah. If you don't getting in early, that's where you want to try and break cycles if you can. So, because you don't want to see perpetual motion of that, and you're trying to, because you got, people are homeless. If you're looking at, not going to school, end up in juvenile correctional facilities, it's not great.
And these are all of those factors which just disconnect, take people away from purpose and community and connection and so forth. So I think that's one of the things. This idea of recovery is a really important thing, and I think one of the exciting things of working in youth mental health as a worker, a practitioner, is projecting hope. We need to, as workers, almost have our expectations a little bit beyond what the client might expect of themselves. So always that emphasis of pushing a little bit. So I think that's one of the really big things. In that area of drug-induced psychosis, I kind of approached it, well, there is substance use and there is psychosis. We may not untangle completely like a cause and effect, but one can be contributing to the other. But look, there's also, I think, part of my thing is also, I think young people are smarter by and large when I was young. At a population level,
Well, look at the
People are
information
making,
people can receive these days when you've got a
yeah,
high-powered
yeah,
computer in the palm of your hand.
totally. And I think, look, one of the biggest predictors of longer term substance use difficulties is age of first use. And we're now seeing, there's a few bumps here and there, but we're now seeing by and large younger people drinking later than 20, 30 years ago. Smoking's not really on the picture now that vaping is just everywhere. So,
Yeah.
and that
Another
level of
ballgame, that
nicotine
one.
dependence is another ballgame.
Mm,
Even the use of illicit drugs, though,
mm.
younger people are starting to use at an older age. They're good things at a population
That's
level.
good.
So it's not all bad news, and I'm very cautious about using words like we're in a drugs
Yeah.
and mental health
Demi.
epidemic and so forth.
No, well, well, you
Um,
want to highlight what's good and, some of the work and research that you're doing, but it's also trying to highlight that so other sectors can, because it's so, stigmatized around mental health, and it's what you can't see because it's invisible. It's inside. But
yeah,
what do you
yeah.
reckon? Like, if you're looking at education, or if you're looking at the like justice in New South Wales, as
Mm.
in justice correctional facilities and that, do you think they're really taken on board? They've still got a lot to learn. Is it there a bit of balance? Is stuff, programs starting to feed in to their system from you guys
It's
or others? Like,
look, I'm in Victoria. I by no means think that Victoria is necessarily leading the way in justice and mental health support within, say, custodial settings. I'm not an expert in that area, I will say. I think across the board, custodial environments for young people are not great environments. And if wherever possible we can find opportunities to support with training, education, connection to community, a lot of advanced planning with release from custody and so forth, it is, I think, is absolute. There's one other really big thing, though, is safe housing.
oh,
And almost if we go from those
that's
basics,
where it
which
all starts,
probably,
having a roof over your head.
yeah. And this is one of the
I
big
deal
things.
with
And
that a
it's one,
lot. Jesus. Yeah.
and we can talk about all sorts of things, from psychological treatments to medications, this, that, and other. But if we go from those fundamentals of Maslow's hierarchy, which I come back to a lot, is, does the person have a safe place to go to? And if that's not there, it needs to be the number one priority that is focused on, and then build up from there. And I think this is one of the really important things we're seeing of for many young people and families that are maybe, for whatever reasons, usually not of their own doing, of disconnected, really doing it tough. Is safe housing is fundamental.
Shelter,
If
shelter, shelter.
yeah,
And
if
it's massive risk too. Like, look, when you don't have shelter, like, we're getting involved with individuals, and where, if they don't have that, people, well, because it's crazy when, either, it doesn't matter if it's kids or adults, what the expectations is for that individual to go and get a house for themselves. Like, if they're
mm,
still, if they're still on illicit drugs, if they've got some type of disability, intellectual or whatever it may be, and they've never, stepped into a housing office, but they've got to
yeah,
try and figure all this out on their own. And, and then sometimes it's easier just to re-offend because you get 3 square
and
meals and back inside, or worse than that, you
unfortunately we
see
do.
self-harm because people just don't know what to do. And if you get drug use and everything on top, and messy.
It is a really messy one, and I think these, one aspect of, they talk about those sort of concepts of social determinants of what in society is really contributing to, whether it be well-being or mental health difficulties. Safe, secure shelter and housing is absolute. I keep coming. I'm like a broken record. Meaningful connections to to others, community, and this idea of purpose, of something I want in my life that's based on my values, the where I want to go, taking me from beyond just the immediate and now. But man, you got to have housing, and this is I think this is going to be one that, and you know, Victoria, we
everybody's
see
struggling
every day. The cost of living plus absurd housing price, which is then reflected in rental with lack of stock, and I keep going on. If we, for instance, will make significant changes in a kind of home ownership and negative gearing, and reduce negative gearing, the amount of difference that would make to support affordable housing and crisis accommodation would be incredible.
Yeah, we need that because there's like up here in New South Wales too, like lack of social community housing from the public sector. There's just nothing. Like it's very,
What's
very
it like on
tricky.
the Central Coast? I imagine it'd be
Not great,
damn hard.
not great, you know, because we're just north of Sydney. So, but you know, and then it's hard too because then because of lack of stock, because then people will get uprooted from one area, and it's like, you know, we got this out. Whoop whoop. There's nothing else, and you got to take it.
That's the other thing.
You know.
You displace people away from
Yep.
there.
Yeah.
Which will be happening so much. So these things are absolutely, you know, they are impacting mental health and well-being. They're impacting people's capacity to function to where that they can and want and are able to, and separating connections.
And that makes it hard, especially if you're moving away from family, if you're moving away from community, culture. You know, if you're mobs that, you know, if they're living on country and have their whole life, and then it's being uprooted, and then that disconnection, and then that can lead to other mental health problems, and you know, intergenerational trauma. Oh
Yeah. So I think it's this thing of you know, it's been interesting, sort of. I guess when I sort of first started in the space, the term mental illness was the main thing we referred to, and you know, they meet diagnostic criteria for whatever condition. Now we use the phrase mental health and well-being, and the concept of let's bring well-being into the picture rather than just see if we can get rid of the symptoms associated with the mental illness. And I think that's a good step. It's vague, it's messy, there's lots of grey areas, but at least we're starting to bring into our mindsets in health systems and structures this idea of well-being is a good thing.
And how can that be incorporated, like well-being, right? Because, you know, it should be, you know, rehabilitate instead of incarcerate. So how could that fold into, like, if it's got to do, it doesn't matter if it's, if you got cultural components to it, if you've got, you know, if it's men, women, like, what would it look like to you instead of just throwing people in jail if it's trying to build a purpose fit, like if it's a facility that can help balance, especially people with mental health obviously coming in, that's what we're talking about, that can go through another step before they're getting slammed behind bars? Is it a facility, or what does that look like? If you got to wave a magic wand over that and you got psychology and other stakeholders behind it, what does that look like?
I'll see how I go with answering. Geez, you bring the small questions at the end, don't you? I reckon it's important. The concept of imprisonment, a prison, a jail, it's a freaking weird one. You've done something that society doesn't approve of, and what we're going to do, we're going to take you to a place, and we're going to make it so it's not going to be a nice place. It's going to be a place that's restrict freedom, choice, etc. So the whole concept of this idea of imprisoning as something, as a response to a crime, is, I think, a really interesting one, Because I think we imprison people not to punish people, is to make us feel better.
Oh, we're safe now,
gives
they're
us-
locked up. We're all good now.
It gives us, it's a thing for our anger.
Mhm.
It's a thing for our going, well, screw them. We don't want them out of the picture. That kind of, I think the purpose of a jail or putting something away is something we really need to think of as a society. It gives us something that we think we're back in control, or gives us a little bit of vent for our frustration that we didn't like what someone has done. And I'm not minimizing what people do. There's a second bit of, and it's an active punishment for, say, me as an offender. If I've done something, then my freedom will be taken from me. So I think that what we are trying to achieve by putting people away is a debate which will just circle on and on and on, and it gets votes. You know, we see that in Australia, see that right across the world of we're going to go hard on crime and we put more people away. And then we obviously get to that space of, well, people come out of prison, are they going to be more pissed off? I would be.
You know, institutionalisation is real. Like we've got clients and people that we get involved in, and you know, and then it's hard for them to be out in the community, and then you drop them off home, and they just want to sit in their room because they're used to a confined space with four walls, and that is real.
That is very real. And look, so
and,
I think,
and can I just say too, Steve, that like people have got to don't forget like the isolation of COVID. How did you feel being locked in at your own house? You know, the correlations there.
There was all sorts of things which that period absolutely had a massive impact on my own well-being. To this day, it still has, for a variety of reasons. And that impact has not been for the better. I think, but to get to your question of what if I had a magic wand,
yes.
Housing for one thing, safe housing, where if people prior to and leaving prison had somewhere safe and reliable, okay? I think that's essential, and housing is a massive one, which I think is threading through so much of what we're talking about. The concept, if people are to head to something that's like a prison or something, the purpose of it has to shift from punishment and I'm going to cause you pain to something more constructive. And that look, I'm talking about, wish lists here. I know that that's not easy or cheap.
Like programs that would suit individuals that are going to help them develop
diverse programs.
Yeah.
That is skill acquisition. That's skill acquisition that's meaningful for the person and translatable into the rest of society. So it's an active place, not a passive place where we restrict everything. It's an active place where there's essence of life skills, of structure, of expectations you're going to be participating. It's an active place, because what happens in prisons is it turns off activity. It stops activity. It inhibits growth. It inhibits learning. It inhibits kind of functional recovery. So people
constant punishment.
It purposefully takes away skills for when you leave. There is no way in a system like that people can work toward kind of recovery, rehabilitation, or whatever. So I think we need to shift it to being an actively productive place instead of a punitively restrictive place, which undoes people, if that makes sense. How to do that is I'm not saying I have the solutions, but I think this mindset of society's idea of what prison should be is we just want to frickin' hurt people and we want to punish them because we feel hurt. And I understand that's often a very natural response. It's not a response that leads to good outcomes, though.
No, and it makes it hard too when that was just on the tip of my tongue.
It's always that way.
Oh God! All right, I just had that on the tip of my tongue, but no. So that's what I was gonna jump into. So, like, you're looking at what you just explained there, and the balance of that, and sort of, where it can be rehabilitation, look at life skills and getting individuals back out to the community, and because a lot is lost. Because I see, when I've talked to individuals that are in jail where things are purposely taken off them, or they might have been in there for 2 years, and that might have been snippets of what they've been able to utilise and do life skills in. Like, very minimal. Like, I don't hear a lot of positive within. Like, because I've been involved and been around a lot of people that have been incarcerated for various reasons. So, and everybody that comes out of a prison and ends up in the advocacy side, and they go into, like, it's along the lines of what you've talked about. Housing is paramount, like, because a lot of people just get popped outside and they got to find it for themselves. There's no sort of lead up, like, inside appropriately. It's a lot of band-aid fixing, and that's what I was going to say. The thing that I was going to say that I was stuck on. You got all these private entities that own prisons. It's making money. So then that's the conundrum you got there as well. Like, that's such a grey area.
Any place where prisons are a profit is, and the only way they're going to make a profit is to cost cuts wherever they can, cut costs. So it really, I think, and I haven't explained well, but that thing of society's expectations of what prison is to make us a place to vent our frustration and anger and hurt and pain.
But if it's going to help on the innovation side, right? So, because what you've been involved in, and I love this for various reasons why, but when you've got, like, just a reach that it can give, but when you've got digital utilisation of certain platforms, like, do you think with, like, what you're doing now, what you've done previously, and with some of the research off the back of that, whether it's going into some of the juvenile detention centres, if you've got where it's psychology digitally just linking in and using some of the innovation that you guys have formulated over time?
I think there's absolutely opportunities. I think there is the technologies are there. For instance, digital mental health platforms. There's workforce that's willing and interested. So we've got the tools. I don't know if the will is really there yet, and to try and look at things differently, and that idea.
But you've helped thousands of people, though, with some of the work that you guys have done.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm optimistic. I think where these kind of discussions are happening a lot more of, can we actually really help sort of people, whether it be in incarceration, in community, and so forth. I think we're and I am optimistic there will be better change. There's always, though, the other flip side of that, which we're always battling. For instance, I'm not sure what it's like up in New South Wales and the Central Coast, but certainly in Victoria, the youth offending, violent criminals takes up a lot of focus. We've got to punish them more. We've got to go hard on them. And we've sort of waxed and waned between different governments. I'm expecting there's going to be another kind of wave of hard-on crime with more young people incarcerated. It is a really tricky one. But it's what happens when people do get into strife, of us being proactive to provide support. I think more attempts for good support is in place, but it's also got to be coupled with that thing of skills, activity, meaningful purpose programs within those institutions too. And as I said, I'm optimistic that steps will go in a better direction than they have been.
Yeah, and is there anything innovative at the forefront that you guys are trying to formulate and work on that are helping individuals in the community, young individuals, whether that's in person or in the digital space?
Yeah, certainly within Orygen and other places I've worked at, there's plenty of digital mental health support. And I think Australia has actually been a leader in digital mental health of providing accessible platforms and so forth. We haven't necessarily been the best at implementing them. And I think where real innovation is going to lead, say, in the digital mental health, and I was in that space for quite a few years, is programs coming together. So instead of there's lots of bits and bits and bits of it coming together, in the digital space, I think where real innovation is going to be, and people will go, oh, why would we just want to do that, is what's called interoperability. So how well does your platform interact with meta services like Instagram, Facebook, and so forth? Because what we probably don't need in the, say, I'll use the digital mental health space, is too many more platforms. Because everyone, I don't know about your iPhone, well, I've got an iPhone and I've got so many apps on there and so forth. We don't need more. We need to be able to work with the massive providers. And that is a little bit of dancing with the devil, of knowing where that can go. So I think that's one big area. I think where I'm going to do an about turn here, I think the pathway to innovation and real innovation is common sense. I think we've got to get things simpler. And I think housing is a key one. I keep coming back to that. And I still come back to this meaningful connections and meaningful purpose. So purpose is about activities that I'm going to empower myself where I can in things that have that are value laden for me. And I think it's almost getting back to some of the more grassroots basics, but I think that's where exciting innovation can be. If we can connect people, because we're freaking awesome at dividing people.
That is true.
And I think that kind of innovation is not going to come from big.
That was my buddy Siri Watch talking to me.
It's not going to come from big institutions. It's going to be coming from grassroots community, showing how it's how they connect and look out for and look after their own.
That's it. It all starts from the foundations, community, from the ground up, grassroots. Does AI have a space to elevate what's going on within what you've talked about and some of these platforms melding together and how it can elevate around mental health?
It's an interesting one. AI's I mean, the idea of some form of machine learning or using algorithms to help us make choices, well, that's been around for ages. It's not a coincidence, the ads that come up in your feeds, and that's data being used to make decisions to inform you, which you then respond to, and all that. So it's around us. There's been a lot of talk, say, is AI going to replace mental health workers, psychologists, and so forth? I don't think so, because people are just thinking about what we could call conversation aids, things that you can have a conversation with. And that can be around, whether it be in, when you call up your bank and you get incredibly pissed off and you're talking to a kind of chat bot or something like that. That's all been around for a while. That's been in place with mental health services. I don't think it's really going to take off. I think it will to a degree, but it's not going to replace human-to-human contact.
No, you can't. And when it comes to like online, like say when you got clinical psychology and when it's got to do with diagnosis.
Yep.
So with most tool sets, do a lot of, because I always worry about people when it's, rural and remote, and you're not going to be sending out psychologists to
No.
going out, because of just exorbitant prices and just travel distance, all of that. So for the most part, and what you've been involved in and what you've saw or heard or whatever it may be, can most tool sets, if it's trying to formally diagnose an individual, it's always obviously better in person because what you can see, but can for the most part you make way.
Yeah, totally. And I think so, Jake, we've never met before, but we're on a digital platform right now. You can see when I smile, I can see when you smile, I can see your body language, I can hear your tone in voice. No, it's not perfect, but it's pretty good. So this thing of, I often think when I was working more in the digital space, was undigitalizing myself, of going, let's do good practice. It just happens to be through this medium. So I think there's an expansion, for instance, of telehealth. And what we're doing now would be like
I
telehealth.
agree.
And I'm going to put something out there that's not innovative. And if you think of Australia has done some incredible things, you remember like School of the Air has been around for when sort of the teachers were putting
Fine.
stuff out to people in remote communities
Oh
when
yeah,
they're doing
fine,
lessons.
flat stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, that the School of the Air was there I remember when I was at school in the 70s, and that had been around for ages. Lifeline, telephone-based service, has been around for ages. So this is not new. You've worked with people, and if I were to say to you, do you do telehealth? And you go, oh, not really. I'd say, Jake, have you ever called someone up on the phone?
Yeah.
Of course you have. You've done
Phone consults.
These are just mediums to still provide good practice. So we use what we can. And, it's being used right across health services. There's telehealth surgery where surgeons may be sort of working with practitioners in the field, remotely guiding them and supervising and so forth. This is great. This is making things more accessible. And I also think we've got now populations that's so well versed with digital mediums that they're usually a lot more comfortable than practitioners with using it. So it's here to stay. COVID, I think, gave it a massive boost.
Yeah, for sure.
In the use of it. And people are much more familiar with. I hadn't used Zoom before 2020. I didn't want to have meetings online, but now it's a rarity to actually do it in person. So that kind of thing is there. In the area of AI, I think there's and digital advancements. I certainly think there's things where decision making might be aided. I think it can do things what we call outcome monitoring, so understanding people's progress, whether it be from wearable devices. There's chat-based interactions and looking at language and so forth. But I think I'll get back to that idea of basics. Connection with others is still going to be the central thread, right? And how technology can help that happen, I think, is where the real great stuff can occur.
True, bringing people together. So that's the main thing.
Yeah.
Just trying to, get out of isolation bubbles where you can, and that's where. And
Yeah.
like last question here. So if you look at isolation bubbles and what this can create, so I was in the news. I was listening to it this morning. So when you're looking at the government, like social media and the impacts that it can have, yes, it's great, can be a useful tool, but also what it can put a handbrake on when it's got to do with development of certain areas with kids or even adults. But so you're looking at, I just want to know from your thoughts, just the impact of social media, and just now you're looking at the government where they want to ban kids from 16 and under. And what's your thoughts on that?
I don't think yet we know what the impact of social media will be. We're going to be seeing the first generation of people heading through not just adulthood, but older adulthood in coming years that have lived through this is going to be the first generation of its kind. And so I'm absolutely worried by access to social media. I'm a parent as well, so I'm biased in this space. And as a child's main kind of influence is their immediate family and parents, and we know by adolescence that starts drifting, and their main influence is their peers. The concept of peers is now different. Peers is a wider community that we don't know. We don't filter that well through social media. And I think, I absolutely think we're in a really strange and risky space. Yes, there's absolutely good that can occur with social media. I'm going to be biased because of my own parenthood.
That's lived experience, though. You got to take that stuff on board.
Yeah. I'd like, yeah, I like they can't go near the freaking things until they're 40. But, that's not going to happen. And I'm also saying this of, COVID hit, and my kids that were in early primary school at that point were in some form of lockdown on or off for 2 years, spent.
Could you see that change?
Grade 2 or 3 on screens.
Yeah,
everything
true.
was delivered on screens. So it set this new precedent. It kind of reset a whole lot of things. I think it's fantastic that we've got an e-safety commissioner who's on the front foot. I'm supportive of that body of work. But I just don't think we appreciate how powerful and mammoth the large American-based tech companies are. That doesn't answer your question, other than I absolutely am nervous about it.
No, but yeah, it does touch on a lot, because that's another really large question that has many lanes to it. But they wield a pretty powerful sword, and how they can, double-edged sword that can, chop through the fabric of our society and in every which way. And they just got to work with each different countries and cultures and different and take on what individuals have to say. How, like any system, it can make theirs better and integrate, and have positive integration, I think.
And I think it's that thing of, should we ban social media and so forth? There's a lot of, we could really get caught up in this thing of what we should stop people doing. Whenever there's discussions like that, we should also complement it with, well, what we've got to bring in what people should be doing. So I absolutely want young people to, whether on their phone or not, frick, I am at night way too much. I want them to be connected. I want them to be active. I want them to be engaged in meaningful activity that's not necessarily screen-based. Now, they're going to continue to use screens, but what I'm saying is don't just focus on what we've got to take away from people. We also really got, and it's like a little bit like that, we've shifted from just talking about mental illness into mental health, into mental well-being. So this is that other thing we got to bring into the conversation rather than just what to restrict people doing.
Yeah, it's going hand in hand. And because you're looking at kids now, like if you're going out and about, you're seeing kids as like they're babies and they're onto these things, they know how to swipe left, right, up, down, do everything. So,
yeah,
but it's just us all learning about it together and how we can utilise it. And with the important work you're doing and how it's trying to balance out mental health. And, because it can be a problem, but it's like, well, I know it's talking about risk mitigation, but, but it's like, how can we just harness and channel the power of it to make sure that, it's trying to get a healthy balance of it, yeah?
Yeah. Look, and there's also that really thing we've gone, it's here to stay. It's not going away. Maybe social media platforms will chop and change and so forth. Trends will shift. and there'll be new platforms to say we're the ethical type. We only, you'll only connect with your close friends, and lo and behold, within 12 months, other forms of advertising comes in and things start to drift. That's going to happen time and time again. I hope that we've also got a group of young people that are probably more tech savvy than I am, so can spot the crap better than many of us can. And I think it's that the big question with technology is it's great if it helps our quality of life rather than dominates our quality of life. What does it help us do?
Yeah, that's it.
And if it's just serving its own purpose to make us look at 2x4-inch screens all day, well that's not.
So it's just dragging people
really
away
drifted
from general life.
Yeah, it's just dragging.
Yeah.
So it's that thing of what does that help us do?
Yeah.
And
I'm going to be interested,
and
I think it can help on the forefront, like how it's going to help, like in the AR sector of it,
yeah,
and how when it's got to do with mental health or other clinical needs, how that can like sway into the persuasion.
I think, and there's certainly VR research has been going on for quite some time. I think there's exciting opportunities in that space, particularly as like Oculus headsets become cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. That there is kind of very cheap apps now which you can plug into that for things like exposure stuff within anxiety disorders and so forth. So I think that will be part and parcel. One thing I said before, the community is always way ahead of, say, practitioners, and it's about practitioners shifting their mindset to bring in new innovations and technology. Because by and large, people go, yeah, I'll try it. But as practitioners, to like old ones like me, to be able to be, a lot more fluid and open to new ideas and less precious.
Spot on. You always load it off the end user, no matter what. So, is there anything else like around the mental health and the platforms, the innovation that you want to throw out in the atmosphere?
I think there's, oh God, where do I start?
Anything, throw it out there.
I think we need to shift thinking that mental health care comes from mental health services only. I think that's one of the really big ones. That all a mental health service can do is in the time they're with a person, which might only be a couple of hours a week or hour a week or whatever. I think this well-being concept is community-led, community-owned. I think that's mobilising and bringing together communities in meaningful ways at population levels. Man, if there was an area of innovation and it's almost undoing 50 years of disintegration of communities, that would be incredible. And I think learning from mobs like yourself, Aboriginal Torres Strait Islanders, First Nation communities from all over the world, I think there is so much in that concept of community, connection to land, connection to history, connection to others, that would put innovation utterly flipped on its head. We got to bring in some humility to learn from it, though. And that's where I don't think it's necessarily going to be in some way out digital AI interface and so forth. I think genuine innovation is in that connection and community, and being smart and open to that.
Well said. Yeah, that's strong. And Aboriginal mob have been helping mob within community for thousands of years. When it's got to do with the physical or the mental health side of things, when it's trying to have a community being together, how can we help? How can we help each other? And
connection to person, place, history, is something that I don't have the language for. I have this almost fantasy of what that must mean, and I hope I'll keep banging on here, but I reckon that's where real meaningful change in mental health, mental wealth, mental well-being is going to be.
Oh, I want to snag that mental health. That's great. No, but yeah, you've you hit it a lot there. But really, uh, really appreciate your in-depth knowledge and where you've gone down the different lanes of what it's got to do with mental health, young people. That's a focus of yes, digital, but now what you've just talked about now, when it's got to do with the innovation of community, really pushing that. Obviously where it all starts too with making sure that at the forefront's shelter, and you worry about the rest of it. So if anybody want to looks into, the work and the research and everything that you're about and what you do and your ethos, how can people get in contact with you or just want to have a yarn or whatever it may be?
I'm happy. I mean, I think I shared my email address with you, so
Yep.
I don't mind being contacted by that in any way. I work for an organisation called Orygen, where people say Orygen. They have a big website and do a lot of activity in that space, where people are most obviously can go and have a look around there. I can't think off the top of my head a list of websites and so forth, but we'll see how we go. But they can look up you too, Jake. You've got a massive amount.
I've been going on, but it's
yeah.
about you. You put it out there. Focus,
Yeah.
No.
But no, seriously, it's such a massive privilege. I feel incredibly lucky to spend this time with you.
And Steve, or Dr. Steve Leicester, I really appreciate your time. It's important to really gain insight to all of this and just, and broadcast it. And hopefully any tidbit of whatever's been said, hopefully can help individuals, or if it's government entities or whatever it may be, where it can have effective change. I like just having a yarn anyway, just for,
Same here. That's the best.
yeah. Just like meeting new people and and just and having a yarn and I'm always on a thirst for knowledge, like whatever it may be, and I'm intrigued and just like looking, down all sorts of offshoots, So, but yeah, no, it was awesome. Really appreciate it. Eh?
Oh, thanks. I hope we can connect again sometime.
No,
Love
that's going to definitely happen. So we'll talk a bit offline about that stuff. So. Dr. Steve Leicester, I really appreciate that. Say, there we go. Dr. Steve Leicester, really appreciate your time and look forward to the next chat.
Absolute pleasure, Jake. Look forward to it.
See, solid yarn with Dr. Steve Leicester, doing a lot of solid work out there and a lot of research behind it to see what's needed out in the community, physically or digitally. Really important. A lot of people out there need help, and I'm glad that there's individuals like Steve and the teams that are surrounding him to make sure that appropriate mental health programs are being delivered throughout the nation. Solid work. Can't wait for the next yarn. And if you like the podcast, hit that subscribe or follow button. And we've also got a Patreon page. The link is within the description. So if you want to roll with the squad and become a patron, that'd be great. And if you want to get in contact with me, you can get me via Instagram at streetrollingcheetah or email one word streetrollingcheetah@gmail.com. Also got a Facebook page, Keep Rolling with Jake Briggs, so check it out. Also on LinkedIn, just Jake Briggs. And want to thank our sponsors, Firmaville Australia, the greatest electric wheelchairs in the land. Wouldn't be sitting in anything else but these 4 wheels right here, and they've got great assistive tech also. So righto, see you on the next one.